The first reading came back wrong, and prime diagnostician Otni did what any competent physician did with a wrong reading. She recorded it, discarded it, and drew again. The chamber was quiet the way the Institute liked its chambers quiet. White walls, white light, the hum of scrubbers pulling every stray particle out of the air. On the platform in the center of the room the human lay strapped in the recline, and around it the induction had already run its course. Vector 7 was in the blood now. It had been in the blood for a full cycle. By every model the concordance had built across 40 prior species, the markers should have been climbing. They were not climbing. They had climbed briefly in the first hour, the way they always did. Then they had stopped, and then they had begun slowly to fall. Otni watched the number on the display fall, and felt the small, clean irritation of a machine misbehaving. "Cyril," she said, "the counter on Tier 2 is drifting, swap it." Her junior analyst crossed the floor without a word and pulled the instrument from its cradle. Cyril was young, membrane still pale and unlined at the throat, and he did his work the way the young did theirs, with too much care and not enough speed. He replaced the counter. He drew again from the port in the human's arm. He fed the draw into the fresh instrument and waited, and the room waited with him, and the number that came up was lower than the last one. "It's not the counter," Cyril said. "Draw again." "Prime diagnostician." "Draw again." He drew again. The number fell again. Otni came to the display herself and stood over it and read it 3 times, because a physician who did not read a number 3 times was not a physician but a person guessing in a white coat, and the concordance did not tolerate guessing. The number was real. The strain that had cracked every wall the galaxy had ever put in front of it was, in the body of this specimen, losing. She looked at the specimen. The human was awake. That too was wrong. The induction should have taken it under, the way it took every organism under, into the fevered dark where the body forgot itself and the strain did its work unopposed. This one was awake and its eyes were open, and it was watching her the way a person watches whether through a window. It was not afraid. Otni had inducted many things in this room, some of them large and armored and proud, and by this point in the cycle all of them had been afraid. The human was sweating. Its short dark hair was wet with it, but its face was still, and when it saw her looking it did not flinch or plead. It moved its lips, and Cyril, who was closer, leaned in to hear. "What did it say?" Otni said. Cyril straightened. His throat had gone a shade paler. It asked what the reading was. Otni did not answer the human. One did not answer a specimen. She turned back to the display and began, in the disciplined way she had been trained, to be wrong about what she was seeing. The Institute stood at the White Reach, a station strung in slow orbit around a dead moon, chosen for its distance from anything that lived. Nothing lived at the White Reach that had not been carried there, catalogued, and permitted. The concordance had built it to be the cleanest place in the known volume, because the work done there required a cleanliness that no natural world could offer. Otni had spent her whole career inside it. She had come up through the wards as a girl with a good nose for pattern, and she had learned the doctrine the way other people learn to breathe, and the doctrine was simple and it was true. Every living thing had a threshold. Find it and you own the species. That was the whole of it. Bodies were locks and the Institute made keys. You introduced the right agent in the right measure and you watched the body fail, and in the shape of its failing you read everything you would ever need to know. How to break it, how to spare it, how to bargain with the world that had grown it. The concordance did not conquer worlds with fleets. It conquered them with the knowledge of how they died. A species that had been mapped this way was a species that could be spoken to from a position no fleet could ever occupy. It was the oldest kind of power and the quietest, and Otni believed in it without reservation, the way she believed in the sterility of her own hands. The human world had come up in the registry 2 seasons before, flagged Rho class, which meant a biosphere the survey teams were forbidden to walk without full isolation. Rho was not the highest hazard grade in the book. It was high enough. A row world was a place where the very dirt was at war with itself, where 100,000 small hungers competed in every handful of soil, where nothing had ever been clean and nothing ever would be. The Vareth found such worlds obscene. Otni had read the survey notes with the mild nausea of a clean person reading about filth, and had thought, as any diagnostician would, that a body grown in such a place must be a catalogue of compromises, a thing held together by scars, riddled with the weaknesses of a life spent losing small wars every day. That was the premise. That was why the specimen was on her platform. The concordance wanted the human threshold, and the human threshold would be, they all assumed, easy to find, because a body that had spent its whole evolutionary history drowning in filth would surely be exhausted, would surely fold at the first clean and deliberate push. Vector 7 was that push. It was the Institute's finest instrument, refined across 40 species and a great many years, an agent that did not merely sicken a body but interrogated it, that found the seam in any immune answer and widened it until the whole edifice came apart. 7 had never failed. Otni had inducted the last 3 species herself and watched 7 walk through their defenses like a clerk walking through an unlocked archive. She had expected the human to take longer than a clerk's afternoon, perhaps, given the row grading. She had not expected the number to fall. Run the induction model against the current draw, she told Cyril. Show me the divergence. He ran it. The model was a clean, confident line that climbed and did not come down. The human's real numbers lay beneath it like a stone at the bottom of a well, dropping away from the prediction hour by hour. The divergence is total, Cyril said quietly. The divergence is an error, Otni said. Somewhere in this room there is a fault, and we will find it because the alternative is that Vector 7 does not work, and Vector 7 works. Recalibrate the whole tier. Start with the induction load. I want to know the strain we actually delivered, not the strain we intended to. This was the correct instinct, and she was proud of it even in the middle of her unease. When a result was impossible, you did not marvel at the impossible. You found the mundane mistake that wore the impossible's clothes. A cracked seal, a mislabeled reservoir, a junior analyst who had loaded a tenth of the dose he thought he had loaded. The Institute had a long memory for such failures and a longer one for the physicians who mistook them for miracles. So they recalibrated. It took the better part of a shift. Cyril pulled the induction records and confirmed the load. The load was correct, full measure, no short pour. They tested the delivery line and found it clean. They ran a control culture from the same reservoir against a standard medium and watched 7 flourish in the dish exactly as it should, greedy and quick, a strain in perfect health. The instrument was not lying. The reservoir was not weak. The dose was not short. The only thing in the room behaving impossibly was the human. Otni stood at the platform a second time and looked at it, and this time she made herself look the way she would look at any specimen, without the flinch of a clean creature near a dirty one. The human breathed. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, worked rhythm, like something carrying weight up a grade. There was a heat coming off its skin she could feel from a hand's width away. Its body had lit itself on fire from the inside. She could see it in the flush, in the sweat, in the fine tremor in the strapped hands, and she understood with a diagnostician's cold clarity that this was the failure she had been waiting for. This was the body breaking. The fever was the beginning of the end. Except the number kept falling. The fever was not the strain winning. The fever was the body's furnace, stoked high and deliberate, and the strain was dying in the heat. "It's cooking it," Cyril whispered. He had come to stand beside her without being told, which was against protocol, and she did not correct him. "Prime diagnostician, the fever isn't the disease. It's the answer. It's burning the strain out." "Bodies do not do that," Otni said. "This one is doing that. Vareth bodies do not do that." She heard the correction leave her and regretted the shape of it, because it was true in a way that mattered and she had not meant to say it aloud. The Vareth did not run fevers. The Vareth had never needed to. Her people had come up on a world so poor in life that sterility was the natural state, and evolution had never troubled to build them a furnace, because there had never been anything to burn. When a Vareth took a contagion, the contagion did what it liked, and the Vareth died, or did not, according to whether the Institute's chemists could kill the thing from outside before it killed the Vareth from within. That was medicine to her people. That was the whole grammar of it. You kept the world clean, and when the world failed and something got in, you fought it with tools from the outside, with instruments and agents and the sterile discipline of the White Reach. You did not fight it with yourself. You had no self to fight it with. The idea was grotesque. A body that let the enemy inside and then set itself alight to be rid of it, that was not a body defending itself. That was a body that had decided its own survival was worth more than its comfort, and had acted on the decision without hesitation, the way you might amputate a limb to save the trunk. She looked at the human's still, sweating face and understood that it had made exactly such a decision, and that it had not needed a physician to make it. The decision was written into the meat. The furnace was standard equipment. "Increase the load," she said. Cyril turned to her. "Prime diagnostician, the current draw hasn't stabilized. We don't know the endpoint of the first." "We know the endpoint. The endpoint is that it wins. I am not interested in watching it win by a wider margin. Increase the load. If 7 cannot map the threshold at one measure, we will find the measure at which it can. Every body has a threshold, Cyril. This one is only expensive." He obeyed. She watched him prepare the second induction, and she told herself the doctrine again, silently, the way a frightened child recites a rule, and she did not yet let herself notice that she had needed to. The second load went in at the change of shift, when the light in the chamber shifted from the flat white of working hours to the slightly warmer white the Institute used to mark the passage of time in a place that had no sky. The human took the second load the way it had taken the first. It stiffened once, a full-body clench that pulled the straps taut and then released, and after that it lay still and breathed its worked breath and let its furnace do the work. Otni stayed at the display through the shift change, and Cyril stayed with her, and they watched the number climb its brief obedient climb and then, near the third hour, hesitate. "There," Otni said, "there it's holding. The second load has saturated the—" The number began to fall. It fell faster than the first time. That was the detail that stopped the breath in her throat, because it should not have been possible, and because she understood immediately what it meant. The body was not merely surviving the strain. It was learning it. The first exposure had taught the furnace where to burn. The second exposure met a furnace that already knew the shape of the enemy and needed no time to find it. 7 had walked into 40 archives as a clerk through an unlocked door. This body had changed the lock behind it while it slept, and now the clerk stood in the corridor with a key that no longer fit, and the body was not even awake to gloat. "Draw again," she said, and her own voice sounded strange to her. The draw confirmed it. The strain in the human's blood was not the strain they had delivered. It was thinner, weaker, cornered, its edges worn down, a thing being eaten rather than a thing eating. Somewhere in the fevered dark, the human's furnace had gotten hold of Vector 7 and begun, methodically, to take it apart. Cyril had gone very pale at the throat, the pale that in a Vareth meant the beginning of real fear, the drop of blood from the surface as the body pulled it inward to protect the core. "We should log this to the overseer," he said. "We will log nothing to the overseer until we understand it. Prime diagnostician, if 7 is failing." 7 is not failing. 7 is doing precisely what it was built to do. It is interrogating the body. The problem is that the body is answering. She heard how that sounded and she did not take it back. "Draw a fresh culture from the last draw. I want to grow what's left of 7 and see what the body has done to it. If it has weakened the strain, we will see the weakening. If it has changed the strain—" She stopped. If it has changed the strain, Cyril said. Then we will see that too, she said, and did not finish the thought, because the end of the thought was not a thing a clean person said out loud in a clean room, and because the human on the platform had opened its eyes again and was watching her with that same untroubled attention, as if it were the diagnostician and she the interesting case. She crossed to the platform. She did not know why. Protocol did not require her presence at the specimen. The instruments did the touching so the physicians did not have to. But she went, and she stood over the human, and she looked down into a face slick with the sweat of a fire she could not feel, and she found that she wanted, absurdly, to ask it a question. The human spoke first. Its voice was low and rough and even. "You keep drawing," it said. "You don't like what you're getting." Otni did not answer. "I've had fevers before," the human said. "This one's a bad one, but I've had bad ones." It closed its eyes for a moment, gathering something, and opened them. "You want to know what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with me. This is what right looks like. You just haven't seen it before." "Be quiet," Otni said, and was ashamed of the words as she said them, because they were not the words of a physician. They were the words of a person who had been frightened by a specimen, and the Institute had a memory for that, too. She went back to the display. The number, when she reached it, had fallen further. They grew the culture through the night, in the sealed dishes behind the tier glass, and when Otni came in at the start of the next working shift, the dishes told her a thing she stood in front of for a long time before she could make herself write it down. The strain the human's body had spat back was not dead. It was not even precisely weakened, though it had been weakened in the human, starved, cornered, taken apart. In the dish, freed from the furnace, it had recovered, and it had recovered wrong. It had come back changed, hardened at the edges the human had worn down, grown around the wound the fever had cut in it the way scar grows around an injury. The human's body had not simply defeated Vector 7. It had wrestled with it, and in the wrestling it had taught the strain how to be wrestled, and the strain had learned. Otni looked at the changed strain flourishing in the sterile dish and felt, for the first time in a long and disciplined career, the specific cold that a clean person feels when they realize that the dirt has ideas. She sealed the dish herself. She did it slowly, with both hands, checking the seal 3 times, the way she checked a number 3 times, because a physician who did not check a seal 3 times was not a physician but a person waiting to become a patient. Then she stood in the white room with the sealed dish in front of her and the human sleeping its worked sleep behind her, and she understood that she was going to have to tell the overseer after all, and that she did not yet have the words for what she would be telling him, because the words the Institute had given her were words for bodies that broke, and the body in her chamber had not broken. It had held. And in holding, it had handed her people back their own best weapon, honed on a stone they did not know how to name. She began to compose the log. She wrote the readings, which were facts, and she found that when she reached the place where a diagnostician wrote the interpretation, the shape of the failure, the threshold found, she had nothing to write. There was no threshold. She had pushed twice and found no floor. The specimen was not near breaking. By every measure she trusted, the specimen was getting better. She left the interpretation blank. She had never in her life left an interpretation blank. She sat with the empty field a long moment, and behind her the human breathed its steady furnace breath, and somewhere in the sealed dish, the changed strain sat waiting in the dark, patient as a debt. Overseer Thessel came to the tier the way weather comes to a coast, without hurry and without asking. He was older than Otni by 2 decades of service, and he wore the age in the deep gray of his membrane, the color a Varith throat took when a long life of clean rooms had leached the last brightness out of it. He had run programs that ended species independence without ever raising his voice. He read her log standing in the anteroom, behind the glass, where the air between him and the specimen was scrubbed 3 times over, and when he had finished reading, he did not look at the human at all. He looked at the empty interpretation field. "You left it blank," he said. I had nothing to put in it, Otni said. You had 2 loads of 7 in a row-grade body and a fever that should have been the strain and was not. He turned the log over in his long fingers. That is not nothing. That is a preliminary finding. The finding is that the delivery failed. The delivery did not fail. We confirmed the load, the line, and the reservoir. 7 is healthy. The body. The body is a row body, Thessal said, grown in filth, held together by scars, and you are telling me it defeated the finest agent the Concordance has ever built twice and taught it a lesson on the way out. Do you hear how that sounds, prime diagnostician? Do you hear the shape of the claim you are making? I hear it. It is why I left the field blank. He was quiet a moment. Behind the glass the human slept, and its chest rose and fell, and the heat still came off it in a way the instruments could read from across the room. Thessal watched the readout of that heat for a while, the long, slow furnace line that no Varith body could have produced, and Otni watched him watch it and could not tell what he made of it. You are frightened, he said at last. It was not a question and it was not unkind, and that was worse than either. It is a natural thing to be frightened of, a body that fights from the inside. It offends the discipline, but fright is a poor diagnostician, Otni. Fright will look at a hard case and call it a miracle so it does not have to do the work. I have seen good physicians ruined by exactly this, a specimen that would not break on schedule, and a physician who decided the specimen was special rather than accept that they had not yet pushed hard enough. He handed her back the log. Push harder, every body has a threshold. You have found that this one is expensive. Good, spend. I have taken it to twice the standard load. Then take it to 4 times, take it to 10. I did not build this institute to be told by a fever that the doctrine has an exception. Find the floor, prime diagnostician. It is down there. All floors are down there. You have simply not yet dropped a heavy enough stone. He left. He did not in the whole visit address a single word to the specimen, and Otni understood the omission for what it was. To Thessal the human was not a person who might hear him. It was a lock. You did not speak to a lock. You spoke about it and then you cut it. She spent. She would think later that this was the part she could least defend, not the first 2 loads, which any diagnostician would have run, but the escalation that followed, the deliberate climb into measures the Institute had never before had cause to reach. She told herself it was the doctrine. She told herself that a floor not yet found was a floor that existed. She increased the load to 4 times standard and watched the human's furnace take it. She increased it to 8 and watched the human shake in the straps for a full hour, its jaw locked, the tendons standing out in its neck, and then go still and hold. Each time the number climbed its brief climb, and each time it fell, and each time it fell faster than before, because each time the body had learned the enemy a little more thoroughly and needed a little less time to begin taking it apart. By the 4th escalation the human had stopped speaking to her. It saved its breath for the burning, but it had not stopped watching. When she came to the platform, she came to the platform more than protocol allowed now, and she had stopped pretending to herself that she did not. It would open its eyes and find her face and hold it, and there was nothing in the look that begged, and nothing that hated, only a flat, sustained attention, as if it were keeping a log of her the way she kept a log of it. Once, when she thought it was too deep in the fever to speak, it said, without opening its eyes, "You're at 8 now." Its voice was a ruin. "I can taste when you change it, tastes like a battery." "Be still," she said. "I'm the stillest thing in this room," it said, which was true, and did not speak again for a full shift. Cyril began to come apart around the 6th escalation. She noticed it the way you notice a hairline crack in a seal, a thing that is nothing until it is everything. He had stopped eating in the tier. He drew the samples with hands that had developed a fine unsteadiness, and he checked the containment seals 4 and 5 times where the protocol asked for 3. And when the number fell, it always fell now, they had all stopped pretending to be surprised. He would look not at the display but at the human, at the small, still burning shape of it, with an expression Otni recognized because she had felt its beginning in her own chest and had refused it entry. "Prime diagnostician," he said to her one shift quietly at the far end of the tier where the human could not hear. "May I say a thing that is not in the protocol?" "Say it." "We are not studying it." He kept his eyes on the seals as he spoke, as if the seals were what he was talking about. "We have not been studying it since the second load. We tell ourselves we are looking for its threshold, but every reading we take is a reading of what it is doing to the strain. We are not learning how to break the human. We are learning how the human breaks 7. And then we grow what it hands back, and the thing it hands back is—" He stopped. His throat had gone the deep pale of true fear. "We should have logged the culture change to the overseer directly, not folded into the daily. Directly. He should have to look at it." He looked at the daily. He looked at the number. He did not look at the dish. Cyril finally turned to her. "Prime diagnostician, the strain in the 3rd generation dish is not 7 anymore. I ran it against the reference this morning. 7 has a shape we have all known for 20 years. This thing has kept the shape and lost the softness. Every place the fever wore it down, it has come back armored. It has been through the human 4 times now, and each time it comes out of that furnace harder than it went in. We built 7 to interrogate bodies. The human is interrogating 7, and 7 is answering. It is getting better at surviving a body that fights, because for the first time in its existence it is meeting 1 over and over, and it is a strain prime diagnostician. It does what strains do. It learns from the fight it survives." Otni was quiet. She had known all of this. She had known it in the way one knows a thing and keeps it in an unlit room at the back of the mind so as not to have to act on it. Cyril had gone into the room and turned on the light. "What are you asking me to do?" she said. "Sterilize the culture line, all generations, every dish. Burn it back to 7 standard and never grow another generation off the human's blood." His voice dropped further. "And stop pushing the human, not for mercy. I know we don't, I know that is not a word we use here. Stop pushing it because every push is another lesson, and we are the only students in this room who are failing to learn." It was, she would think later, the most competent thing anyone said in the whole affair, and it was said by the most frightened person in the building, and she did not do it. She told herself she needed authorization to destroy a culture line, which was true. She told herself the overseer would want the changed strain preserved for study, which was also true, and was in fact exactly what the overseer would want, and was exactly the problem. She told Cyril to sterilize the working surfaces and double the containment on the culture tier and continue, and she watched the crack in him widen, and she did nothing about the crack. "You'll grow it," Cyril said, "not an accusation, a diagnosis. You'll show him the armored strain and he'll see a weapon and you'll grow it because that is what the Institute is for." "I will show him a hazard," Otni said, "and we will decide together what it is." But she knew, even as she said it, what Thessal would decide. She had known Thessal for 20 years. She grew it. She did not do it out of ambition, or not only. She did it because the doctrine had a hollow at its center now and she could not stop touching the hollow with her tongue. The human would not break. Fine. But 7 had come out of the human transformed, and if the human could not be mapped, then perhaps the thing the human made could be. Perhaps the threshold was not in the body after all. Perhaps it was in the weapon the body forged, and if she understood that weapon, she would understand the body that forged it, and the doctrine would hold, and the empty field would fill. So she grew the armored strain, generation on generation, and she studied it, and it studied her back. That was how she came, slowly, to the thing that finally frightened her past the point of discipline. The strain the human had made was no longer interested in the human at all. She tested it against a human tissue sample, a standard reference the Institute kept for calibration, and the armored strain touched it and drew back, sluggish, uninterested, like a picked lock that has learned the shape of one door so thoroughly it has forgotten there are others. The human had beaten 7 so many times that 7 had given up on humans. It had learned that this kind of body was a losing fight. And then she tested it, because she was a diagnostician and a diagnostician tests, against a sample of Varith tissue. The armored strain woke up. She watched it happen behind the tier glass with her own instruments, and she did not at first believe it, which was becoming a habit she despised in herself. The strain that had grown listless against human tissue moved toward the Varith sample with a directed, terrible appetite. Everything the human had taught it, the hardness, the patience, the armor grown around the fever's cuts, it now carried toward a body with no furnace of its own. A Varith body could not run a fever. A Varith body had no way to cook a strain out of its blood. A Varith body kept itself safe by keeping the world clean, and this strain had been forged, generation after generation, in the one environment that was the opposite of clean, the burning interior of a body that fought, and it had come out the far side into her sterile white station as the precise thing her people had no defense against. She sat back from the instrument. The white room was very quiet. Across the tier the human slept, or seemed to, and its furnace line rose and fell on the readout, steady, patient, the flame of a body that had been fighting since it drew its first breath in the filth of a row world, and had never once considered that fighting might be optional. They had brought a human to the white reach to find its weakness. They had put their finest weapon into its blood and told it, in the only language the Institute knew, to break. And the human had taken the weapon and burned it, and handed it back sharpened, not sharpened against itself, because nothing they own could stay sharp against a body like that, but sharpened against them, because a fire that hot leaves nothing soft, and the Varith were the softest thing in the volume. Otni understood, sitting in the quiet, that the premise had inverted while she was busy defending it. She had thought she was studying the human's weakness. She had been building, with her own careful hands, a map of her own. She did not go to the overseer that shift. She told herself it was because she needed a cleaner confirmation, one more generation, one more test, and this was true, and it was also cowardice, and she had lived long enough to know that the two were often the same garment worn different ways. She stayed in the tier and she ran the confirmation, and while it ran she found herself standing at the platform again, over the sleeping human, its face slick and still, its dark hair matted with the sweat of a fire that had been burning for 11 days. It opened its eyes. "You went quiet," it said. Its voice had healed a little. The fever had begun at last to bank, the strain in its blood so thoroughly beaten that even the human's furnace was letting the coals go down. "For a couple of days there, you stopped changing the load. You stopped coming over to look at me like I was the thing that was wrong." It studied her face with that flat attention. "You figured it out, didn't you?" "Figured what out?" Otni said, and hated the smallness of the question. "What you made." The human's mouth moved, not quite a smile. The Varith had no exact word for the human expression, and Otni had never needed one until now. "I felt it, you know. Every time you put it back in me it was a little meaner, harder to burn. By about the 4th round I stopped worrying about whether I'd win, because I always win. That's not bravery, that's just the machine I am. I started worrying about what you were going to do with what came out." The not-quite smile went away. "You kept a batch, course you did. And you tested it on yourselves because you're doctors and doctors test. And now you're standing over me at the end of a shift you should have gone home from, and you can't figure out how to say the thing out loud." It let its head fall back against the recline. "I'll say it for you. You've got no fever. Whatever I made in here, it's going to walk through your people like they left every door open. Because they did. They've had clean hands their whole lives. They never learned to burn." "Be quiet," Otni said, for the second time in the affair. And for the second time she heard that it was the wrong words, the words of a frightened person and not a physician. "I've been quiet," the human said, "for 11 days. You people talk a lot for a species that's about to find out what a body is for." The confirmation finished behind her. She did not need to read it 3 times. She read it once, and it said what the human had already said. In the flat, clean numbers the Institute trusted more than any voice, and she stood in the white room between the sleeping weapon they had forged and the burning furnace that had forged it, and she understood that she had run out of mundane mistakes to hide behind. There was no cracked seal here. There was no short pour. There was only a body that fought, and a people who had forgotten how, and a doctrine that had walked them, one confident escalation at a time, straight into the one experiment they could not afford to have run. She went to find the overseer. The overseer's office had no window to the specimen tiers and no window to the moon. It had no window at all. Thessal had chosen it that way, a clean gray box at the sterile heart of the station, because a man who watched the work too closely came to feel things about the work, and Thessal had built a long career on feeling nothing about it. He listened to Otni without interrupting, which was his way, and when she had laid out the whole of it, the armored strain, the listlessness against human tissue, the appetite for Varath tissue, the confirmation she had read once and trusted, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing she had known he would say and had come anyway hoping he would not. "You have made a discovery," he said. "You should be proud." "Overseer, I have made a hazard. The strain in the culture tier is lethal to our own biology and inert against theirs. It is the exact opposite of a finding. We put an agent into a body to learn how that body dies, and instead the body has handed us an agent that teaches us how we die. There is nothing to be proud of. There is a fire in the culture tier and we are all made of paper." "You are frightened again." "I am correct again. The two are not exclusive." Something moved behind Thessal's gray face, a flicker she had learned to read across 20 years, not fear. He did not have the equipment for it the way the young did, but interest, the cold, acquisitive interest of a man handed a thing worth more than the thing he asked for. "Consider what you are actually telling me," he said. "A raw body, given our finest instrument, will not merely survive it but reforge it into something new. It takes what we give it and returns something refined, reliably, generation on generation, without instruction, simply by being what it is. You are treating the direction of that refinement as the essential fact. I am treating it as an accident of the starting material. We gave it 7 shares more of its shape with our biology than with theirs. Of course the edge bent toward us. The human worked the clay we handed different clay." He let the thought settle. "You do not have a hazard, Otni. You have the most productive specimen in the history of this institute, and you want to burn it because it frightened you. It has frightened me 11 days running. That is data, Overseer. You taught me to trust the readings I did not like. I taught you to find the floor. Bring me the human's threshold and I will hear every fear you own. Until then, preserve every generation, double the tier, and draw a full schedule." He turned back to the gray wall. "Every body has a floor. You have simply been dropping expensive stones." She went back to the tiers with an order she did not believe and a fear she could not spend. And she did the thing that people did in institutions that had outlasted their own doctrine. She obeyed the order and prepared, quietly, against it. She doubled the containment on the culture tier which the order required. She also drafted a sterilization sequence for the whole culture line and left it queued, one authorization short of running, which the order did not require and would not have permitted. She told herself it was prudence. It was, in fact, the first disloyal act of a loyal career, and she knew it, and she left it queued. But she also obeyed the order because that was the shape of her, and the order had teeth she could not yet see a way past. Find the floor. Thessal had handed her a way to keep looking, and the way was the one thing in his whole certainty that had the ring of a real idea. Hand it different clay. 7 had come out of the human bent toward Varath biology, the overseer said, because 7 had a shape the human's furnace had been able to fold against the Varath. Fine. Then the thing to do, the thing that might yet find the threshold and fill the blank field and let her stop feeling the hollow at the center of the doctrine with her tongue, was to give the human an agent with no shape at all in common with her own people, a tool the furnace could fold against nothing it had ever met, and see whether the body that had beaten 7 so easily could beat something it had never been built to beat. She did not have such a tool herself. The Institute's second family of agents lay outside her competence, and she was too honest, even now, to pretend otherwise. So she did the thing a diagnostician does when the case exceeds her, the beat the pacing of a real crisis always forces. She called in someone older. The immunographer's name was Ivan, and Ivan had been reading the failures of bodies since before Otni was born. Ivan was the oldest working physician at the White Reach, so old that the membrane at the throat had gone past gray to a translucence you could see the slow pulse through. So old that the young ones told stories about the species Ivan had mapped in the early years, the ones whose thresholds were in the textbooks now under a designation nobody remembered, was a person's initials. Ivan came up to the tier slowly, on a physician's careful legs, and stood at the platform a long time before saying anything at all, reading the human the way an old hand reads a hard chart, without hurry, without the flinch the young one still carried near a row body. "You increased the load to 8, Ivan said at last. It was not a question. Ivan had read the log on the way up, and it burned all 8 and taught the strain a lesson on its way out, faster each time. And now the overseer wants a floor, and you cannot find one with 7, so you have called me to bring the human something 7's family cannot lend it." The old physician looked at her with the flat, clear eyes of a creature that had spent a long life past being frightened by results. "You understand what you are asking me for. You are asking me to spend my second family on a body that ate your first. I have 3 agents left in me worth the name Otni. I am old. I do not make new ones anymore. If I spend one here and it goes the way 7 went, I have spent it for nothing, and I do not have many left to spend." "I am asking," Otni said. "The overseer is ordering. You may take that division however comforts you." Ivan almost smiled, the old physician's version of it. "There is no comfort in it. There has not been comfort in this tier since the first reading refused to climb. I could feel it from 2 decks down. But I will do it, and I will tell you why. Not for the overseer. Because I have mapped 40 species in my life, and I have never once been surprised, not truly, not since I was a child. And that thing on your platform has surprised me from the doorway. I would like to be surprised once more before I am too old to feel it, so I will spend an agent. Let us see what the human does with a tool it cannot possibly have met." They inducted the second agent at the change of shift. Ivan prepared it with the slow exactness of a lifetime, and it went into the human's blood the way the first had, and this time there was no shared shape for the furnace to find, no seam in the Varith's own biology for the body to fold the enemy against. This was the clean test, the one Thessal had asked for without understanding what he was asking. If the human had a floor, it was here, against a thing built to be foldable against nothing. The human took it the way it had taken everything. It stiffened once, the full body clench that pulled taut against straps Cyril now left loose, and then it lay back and let its furnace do the work, and Otni and Ivan stood at the display through the shift and watched the number climb its brief obedient climb, and hesitate and fall. "It should not be falling," Ivan said quietly. "There is nothing in that body for it to fold this against. I built it to be unfoldable. I have spent 60 years making agents unfoldable, and that one is the least foldable thing I ever made, and it is falling, Otni. The furnace is not finding a seam. The furnace does not need a seam. It is simply—" The old physician stopped, and Otni watched a thing she had never expected to see, which was surprise, real surprise, moving across a face that had told her it had not felt it since childhood. It is not folding the agent against a weakness. It is burning it against nothing. It does not require the enemy to have a shape. It simply raises the whole body past the point where anything that is not the body can live, and it holds there, and it pays whatever that costs, and it does not stop paying until the enemy is gone. There is no lock here. There was never a lock. The furnace is not a key. It is a fire that does not care what door it is standing in front of. The human opened its eyes. It found Otney's face, then the old physician's, and it studied Ivan with the flat attention it had spent 19 days spending on all of them. "You brought in a new one," it said. Its voice was a ruin again. The second agent had stoked the fire back up and the fever sweat had returned, slicking the dark hair, but the face beneath it was still. "This one tastes different, colder, like biting foil." It let its head fall back. "You keep changing the variable. Every day it's a new thing in the line, a new taste, a new load. You want me to tell you the part you keep missing?" It closed its eyes, gathering the breath the fever was taxing. "I'm the constant. You keep changing what you put in, and every time you change it, you learn one more thing about your tools and nothing about me, because I do the same thing to all of them. Fever, wait, burn, win. It's not 40 answers to 40 questions. It's one answer to every question you've got. And you're going to keep asking, because that's what you're for. And I'm going to keep giving you the one answer, because that's what I am. And the only thing that's going to change is that you're going to run out of questions before I run out of the answer." Ivan stood at the platform for a long moment after that, the oldest physician at the White Reach looking down at the youngest thing on it. And then the old immunographer turned to Otney and said, in a voice gone quiet with the weight of 60 years turning over at once, "Burn it. Not the specimen, the culture line, the agents, all of it. Whatever it hands back this time will be worse than what 7 became, because I built this one meaner, and a meaner tool through that furnace comes out a meaner thing, and it will not come out bent toward the human. Nothing that goes through it comes out bent toward the human. It all comes out bent toward us. Burn the line, Otney, and go to the overseer, and tell him the old immunographer spent an agent to find the human's floor and found the ceiling of his own doctrine instead. Tell him I said there is no threshold. Tell him I said it, and that I have never in 60 years said it about anything, and that I am saying it now about the small gray thing on your platform, and that he should be more afraid of the sentence than he has ever been of anything, because I do not say it, and I am saying it." Otney did not burn the line. She would carry that later, among the things she could least defend, that Ivan, older and clearer and past all fear, had told her plainly to burn it, and that she had not, because the overseer's order still had teeth, and because the hollow at the center of the doctrine still pulled at her tongue. She grew the second agent instead, generation on generation, alongside the first, and she studied both, and both told her the same thing in the flat clean numbers she trusted more than any voice, including the old immunographers. Whatever went through the human came out bent toward the Vareth, sharpened on a stone her people had no name for and no defense against. Ivan went back down to the deep decks that night and did not come up to the tier again, and Otney understood that the oldest physician at the White Reach had gone to spend the last of a long life somewhere quiet, having been surprised one final time, and having not enjoyed it. The human had begun, by then, to mend. It was the strangest thing she had watched in a room built for watching strange things. The fever banked over 3 days from a fire to a cold to a warmth, and beneath it the body reassembled itself with an indifferent competence that made her instruments look like toys. The furnace had cost it. She could read the cost in the wasted muscle, in the way its hands shook when the straps came loose for the cleaning cycles, in the gray beneath its skin that was the human version of the pale her own people took under fear. It had spent itself down to the frame. But it was not broken, and it was not dying, and every reading she took now was a reading of a body climbing back up out of a hole it had dug on purpose. On the 14th day it asked for solid food and kept it down. On the 15th it sat up in the recline without the straps, because Cyril, against every protocol in the tier, had begun loosening them during the cleaning cycles and had stopped fastening them all the way after, and Otney had seen him do it and had said nothing, because the straps had never been what was keeping the human on the platform. The human stayed because there was nowhere in the White Reach for a thing like it to go. "You've got a decision coming," the human told her on the 15th day, watching Cyril run the morning draw with hands that shook worse than the human's now. "Your boss wants to keep the batch. You want to burn it. And the kid there, a small movement of its chin towards Cyril, the kid figured out days ago that the batch is going to get out whether anybody decides anything, because that's what the batch is for. It's not a sample, it's a fuse. You've all been treating it like it's waiting for you. It's not waiting for you, it's waiting. Nothing gets out of a doubled tier, Otni said. Everything gets out of everything, the human said without heat. That's the first thing you learn on a world like mine. There's no clean, there's just fast enough or not. You people built a whole civilization on the idea that clean is a place you can live in. It looked around the white room, the scrubbed air, the sterile light, the seals within seals. It's not a place. It's a fight you win every second until the second you don't. The second it did not win came 4 days later, and it did not come through the doubled tier. It came through analyst Vosk, who ran the reference archive 2 decks down, and who had nothing to do with the human at all. Vosk's work was the calibration library, the tissue references, the standard cultures, the frozen catalog against which the whole institute measured its findings. When the culture tier drew its full schedule, generation on generation of the armored strain, the spent material went where all spent material at the White Reach went, down the reclamation line to be sterilized, cataloged, and archived, because the Institute threw nothing away that might one day be a reference. Somewhere in that ordinary river of spent samples, a seal that had passed inspection 3 times failed on the 4th, in a way no one would reconstruct for certain, and a trace of the human's foundry went into the reclamation line unsterilized, and Vosk, doing the most routine work in the building, breathed the White Reach's own clean air and took it in. Otni learned of it the way you learn of a fire, by the alarm rather than the flame. The tier lights shifted to the deep amber the Institute used for a containment event, and the scrubbers changed their pitch, and a voice she did not know read a designation over the station channel that meant a Vareth had been exposed to an uncatalogued agent. She was at the human's platform when it happened. She saw the amber wash across the white walls, and she saw the human turn its head toward the changed light with an expression she would spend a long time failing to forget, because it was not triumph and it was not fear. It was recognition. The human had told her the fuse was waiting, and now the fuse had gone, and the human's face said only, "There it is." "That's not me," the human said quietly. "You understand that, whatever just happened, I didn't do it, I never touched your batch. Your people grew it, your people spilled it, your people breathed it. All I ever did was have a fever." It watched the amber light. "But they're going to look at me when they can't look at the truth. People always look at the specimen. It's easier than looking at the doctrine." Otni did not answer it. She was already moving. Vosk was quarantined within the hour, in the isolation ward on the medical deck, behind the thickest glass the White Reach owned, and Otni stood outside that glass with the Institute's best clinicians and watched a Vareth body meet the human's foundry with no furnace to fight it. It was the first time in her career she had watched one of her own people take a contagion and lose from the inside, and she understood, standing there, the full obscenity of what her species had never had to learn. Vosk did not run a fever. Vosk's body had no way to cook the thing out, no ancient furnace built by a filthy world, no scarred generational memory of a war fought in the blood. Vosk's body did what Vareth bodies did. It waited for the clinicians to kill the agent from the outside, with instruments and chemistry and the sterile discipline of the White Reach. And the agent, forged in 11 days of human fever, had been built precisely to survive that. Everything the human's furnace had done, the clinicians now tried to do from the outside with their tools, and the strain shrugged off the tools the way it had learned to shrug off the furnace, because a body had taught it, and a body was a better teacher than any instrument the Institute owned. They lost Vosk on the 2nd day. It was quiet and clean and entirely wrong, and Otni stood at the glass through the whole of it and could not make herself look away, because looking away felt like a lie she had told for too long already. Cyril found her there afterward. His throat was the palest she had ever seen it, past fear now into the flat gray region beyond, where a young Varith's body has done all the retreating it knows how to do and simply holds. "It's in the reclamation line," he said. "We don't know how far. The line touches every deck. The line was designed to touch every deck because sterilization is supposed to be the last thing that happens to anything, so it made sense to run it through the whole station." He laughed, a small cracked sound the Varith made only at the edge of breaking. "We built a river that goes everywhere, and we filled it with the one thing we can't survive, because a specimen on a platform had a fever, and our overseer called the fever a foundry, and we grew what came out of it because the doctrine said every body has a floor." He looked at her. "The human has a floor. I found it. Do you want to know where it is?" "Where?" Otni said. "It's under us," Cyril said. "The floor was never in the human. The floor was in the room. We kept dropping stones looking for the bottom of the specimen, and we found the bottom of ourselves instead." Otni did not sterilize the culture line that day, though the sequence sat queued, and one authorization would have run it. She understood now that it was already too late for the culture line. The fire was in the reclamation river, and the river went everywhere, and burning the tier would be closing a door on a room that was already empty. She understood something else, too, standing at the glass where Vosk had been. The human had told her the truth from the second day, and she had spent 11 days finding mundane mistakes to hide it behind, and there were no more mundane mistakes. There was only the plain shape of it, and the plain shape was this. Her people had gone looking for the weakness of the strongest thing in the volume, and had found, instead, that they were the weakest thing in the volume, and had been all along, and had survived only because they had never before met anything that fought. She went to the platform. The human watched her come. It looked, for the first time, tired in a way that was not the fever, a deeper tiredness, the tiredness of a thing that has told the truth to people who could not hear it, and has watched the cost of their deafness come due. "How bad?" it said. "We lost one," Otni said. It was the first honest sentence she had given it. "It is in the reclamation line. The reclamation line touches every deck." The human closed its eyes. "Yeah," it said, "it would." It opened them. "So here's where you are. You've got a fire in your walls that you can't put out with your tools because your tools are exactly what it was built to beat. And you've got one thing on this whole station that the fire won't touch." It looked at her steadily. "You've been trying to find out what's wrong with me for 2.5 weeks. You want to try a different question. Ask what's right with me. Because right now, on this station, I'm the only body here that this thing has already lost to. And I'm guessing you're about to run out of people who can say that." The White Reach had a protocol for containment events, and the protocol was good, and it did nothing, because it had been written by people who had never met a contagion that fought back. It called for isolation, for sterilization sweeps along the reclamation line, for the sealing of affected decks and the flooding of those decks with the Institute's most aggressive scrubbing agents. Otni watched the clinicians run every step of it with the crisp competence of a service that had drilled the protocol for 100 years, and she watched every step of it fail, and she understood why with the terrible clarity of a physician who has finally stopped arguing with the diagnosis. The protocol was a tool. Every part of it was a tool. It killed the agent from the outside, because the Varith had no inside to kill it from, and the human's foundry had been forged for the express and singular purpose of surviving exactly that. 11 days of fever had taught the strain what the outside felt like, what the sterile agents felt like, what pressure and heat and chemistry felt like, because a fever is all of those things at once, applied without mercy, over and over, by a body that will not quit. By the time it left the human, it had passed every examination the outside could set. And now the outside was all the Varith had. The sweeps ran. The strain crossed them. It moved along the reclamation river the way the human had said everything moved on its world. Not fast, particularly, but patiently, winning each second until the second the clean people lost. And the clean people had never learned to win more than 1 second in a row because they had never had to. The second exposure was a clinician from the isolation ward. The third and fourth were two techs from the reclamation deck who had run the sterilization sweep that did not work. By the sixth, the Institute stopped reading the designations over the open channel, because a number that only climbs is a number that empties a station of its nerve, and Thessal, at last, closed the white reach. No craft in, no craft out. Not to protect the wider concordance, though that was the reason entered in the record, but because a closed station has no witnesses, and Thessal had spent 20 years understanding the value of no witnesses. He summoned Otni to the gray box on the ninth exposure. He looked, for the first time in her memory, like an old man. The gray of his membrane had deepened past the color of long service into the color of a body that has begun, quietly, to be afraid at a depth it has no practice managing. "You cued a sterilization sequence for the culture line," he said. "Before the breach, you disobeyed my standing order and prepared to destroy Institute material without authorization." "I did," Otni said. "I would do it again. It would not have mattered. The fire was already in the river by the time Vosk breathed." "You knew this would happen." "I feared it. You called the fear a foundry and told me to be proud." She did not say it cruelly. There was no cruelty left in her. It had all been spent days ago at the glass where Vosk had died. "I am not here to assign the blame, Overseer. The blame is a luxury for a station that is going to survive to hold an inquiry. I am here to tell you what the human told me on the first day, which I did not hear, and on the 11th day, which I did not hear, and which I am now hearing, too late, in a building where our own people are dying of our own cleverness. The human does not have a threshold. The threshold was never the point. The human is a body that fights from the inside, and we are bodies that cannot, and every tool we own is a tool for a fight we have never had to have. There is no key here, Overseer. There is no lock. There is only a species that learned, a very long time ago, that survival is a thing you do with your whole self, every second, forever, and a species that learned to keep the world so clean it never had to learn anything at all. We are the second species. We are dying of it now." Thessal was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice with the doctrine still in it, because a man does not put down in an afternoon the thing he has carried for 40 years, "There is an answer in the human's body. It fights the strain. We watched it fight the strain, if we can understand the mechanism. There is no mechanism to lift out and carry home. That is the part you will not survive believing, so believe it quickly. The human does not have a device in its blood that we can copy into ours. It has a furnace, built over more generations than the concordance is old, wired into every part of what it is. You cannot install a furnace in a body that was built to never need one. You cannot hand a clean people the ability to burn. The human strength is not a tool, Overseer. That is the whole of the horror and the whole of the lesson. We came here believing every strength could be reduced to a mechanism and every mechanism to a key. And we have finally met a strength that is not a mechanism. It is a way of being alive, and you cannot steal a way of being alive. You can only be killed by it or be spared by it, and the difference has nothing to do with your instruments." "Then we are dead," Thessal said. He said it flatly as a finding. "Perhaps. But there is one body on this station the strain has already lost to. It lost to the human 11 days running. Whatever we do now, we do it through the only door the fire will not come through, and the door is the specimen you called a foundry, and I called a hazard, and neither of us called a person." She met his gray eyes. "I am going to go and ask the person for help. I wanted you to know that I intend to ask it as a person, because I have run out of every other kind of question, and because I would like, before this is over, to have done one honest thing." She turned to go. "Otni," Thessal said. She stopped. He was looking at his own hands, the long, clean fingers that had never in their life touched a thing that was not permitted, and there was, at last, something in his face that the young ones' faces had been wearing for days. "When you ask it," he said, "the person, Ask it why it isn't glad. It has watched us dying for the better part of a week. It has every reason. I would like to understand why it isn't glad." "I don't think it is anything," Otni said. "I think it is enduring. I think that is what it does. I think being glad or not being glad is a thing you do when survival gives you the spare capacity for it, and I do not think its world ever gave it the spare capacity, so it simply does not spend any on us. We are weathered to it, Overseer. We have been weathered to it the whole time. I think that is the part you would least like to understand, so I will leave you to it." She found the human sitting up on the platform, unstrapped, the cleaning cycle's residue still on its arms, watching the amber light that had not gone back to white in 6 days. Cyril was with it. Cyril had, she saw, been talking to it, really talking, the way one talks to a person, not a specimen, and she understood that her junior analyst had crossed some interior line days ago that she was only now approaching. The two of them, the young Vareth and the human, looked up when she came in, and there was between them a thing she did not have a word for and did not resent, because it was the only warm thing left in the building. "He told me it's at 9, the human said. 9 of your people." And climbing, it studied her. "You came to ask me for something. Sit down. You look like you're about to fall down, and I've had enough of watching your people fall down." Otni did not sit, but she stayed and she asked. She asked it plainly, without the armor of protocol, in the plain grammar Cyril had apparently already found, whether there was anything in what it was, anything at all, that could help a people who could not burn survive a fire built to beat the burning. The human listened to the whole question. It did not answer quickly. When it did, it spoke slowly, the way a person speaks who has decided to be exact because the cost of being loose is other people's lives. "I'll tell you what I know," it said. "I'm not a doctor. I ran life support on a survey tender. I kept air breathable and water clean and heat where it was supposed to be, for a crew of 11, for 4 years. And then your people took the tender apart and took me here. So understand that when I talk about bodies, I'm talking like a woman who kept a machine alive, not like one of you." It gathered itself. "Here's the thing you keep getting wrong, and you're going to keep getting it wrong because it's built into how you think. You keep looking for the answer in my blood, like there's a part you can take out. There isn't. I'm not going to be able to hand you a jar of the thing that saves you." It looked at Cyril, then back at Otni. "But I've been lying here for 2.5 weeks watching you people, and I've figured out what's actually killing you, and it isn't the strain. The strain is just the knife. What's killing you is that when a thing gets inside you, you wait. You wait for a tool. You wait for a clinician. You wait for the outside to fix the inside because you've never had an inside that could fight, so you never built the habit of the inside doing anything at all. That's the disease. The strain is just what showed you that you had it." "We cannot grow a furnace by wanting one," Otni said. "You said so yourself." "No, you can't." The human's face did something complicated. "So stop trying to become me. You can't. That door's closed, and it was closed 1 billion years ago on a world you never had to live on. But here's what I keep not being able to make you hear." It leaned forward, and for the first time there was something under the flatness, not warmth exactly, but weight, the weight of a person who has decided to spend some of the spare capacity after all. "You don't survive this by becoming strong. You survive it by admitting, finally, in a way your whole civilization has never once admitted, that you are not. Everything you've done since Vosk breathed has been the move of a people who still, underneath, believe they're the top of the ladder, sweeping, sterilizing, closing the station, protecting the doctrine. You're still trying to win the way you always win. And the strain is going to keep beating you because it learned to win from a body that never once believed it was going to win and just kept fighting anyway." It sat back. "You want my help. My help is this. It's not a jar, it's a sentence. Say it and mean it and you might get somewhere. Say, we are the fragile ones here. We always were. And then act like it. Because that's the only thing on this station you've never tried." Otni carried the human sentence back through the tears like a stone in the mouth. "We are the fragile ones here. We always were. It was not a thing the Institute had a place to file. There was no field in any log for it. She found, walking the amber corridors past the sealed doors of decks that used to hold her colleagues, that she believed it completely, and that believing it changed nothing about what was going to happen, and that this was perhaps the most human thing she had learned all week, that a truth could be total and arrive too late in the same breath. The exposure count reached 14 on the day. The concordance answered the white reach's silence. It did not answer with help. Otni had known it would not, in the place where she kept the things she knew and did not say, and she watched the answer come in over the station channel and felt the last of the doctrine go cold in her hands. A response element had been dispatched. It would arrive in 9 days. Its mandate was not rescue. Its mandate was resolution, the word the concordance used for a contamination that could not be locally contained, and the resolution the concordance practiced was the resolution it had always practiced, the only tool it fully trusted, the one that had never once failed it in all its clean and careful history. It would sterilize the source. It would burn the white reach down to sterile metal and vent the ash to the dead moon and seal the record, and it would do this without regard to who or what was still breathing inside, because a fire in the walls is put out by burning the house, and the concordance had built its whole civilization on the certainty that the house was always worth less than the street. They were the source now. The physicians of the White Reach who had spent their careers deciding which worlds were expendable had become the expendable world. The doctrine did not blink at this. The doctrine had never blinked at anything. It simply turned, smooth as a scrubber, and applied itself to them. Otni brought the message to Thessal and found him already exposed. He was in the gray box still, because he had refused the isolation ward, and she understood why the moment she saw his throat. It had gone past the deep pale of fear into a color she had only ever seen at the glass watching Vosk. He had known before she came. He had the strain in him, and he had chosen to meet it in his office, at his desk, beneath the doctrine he had served, rather than behind glass in a ward where the young ones died. She could not decide, looking at him, whether it was dignity or cowardice, and then she understood that at this depth the two were the same garment, worn by a man who had run out of ways to wear anything else. The response element, he said. He had read it, of course he had read it. 9 days. 9 days. They will burn us. Yes. He was quiet, and then he made a sound she had never heard a Varith make, low and worked, and it took her a moment to understand that Overseer Thessal, at the end of 40 years of feeling nothing about the work, was laughing. I approved the resolution mandate, he said, 6 times, in this office, for 6 worlds that could not be locally contained. I wrote the standard that is going to be applied to me. I wrote it well, Otni. I was proud of how well I wrote it. The laughter went out of him. It is a good standard, it will work. That is the worst of it. It will work perfectly because burning the house is the one thing that always works, and I built my whole life on the one thing that always works, and I never once asked what kind of a mind requires a tool that always works. A mind that has never had to fight. A mind that has only ever had to erase. He looked at her with his dying throat. The human is right. It has been right since the first day. We are the fragile ones. A strong thing learns to survive. Only a fragile thing learns to erase, because erasing is what you do when you cannot survive any other way. We called it power. It was never power. It was the most elaborate flinch in the history of the volume. Otni said nothing. There was nothing a physician could say to a finding that complete. You are going to defy me, Thessal said. It was not a question. You have that look. You had it when you cued the sterilization sequence against my order. You have a plan you know I would forbid, and you have come to tell me because you have decided to do one honest thing before the end, and telling the dying man you are about to disobey him is your idea of honesty. He almost smiled. Tell me then. Be honest. I find I have developed, very late, a taste for it. The human cannot be saved by anything we own, Otni said. But the human cannot be killed by the fire in our walls. It has already beaten that fire. Whatever the response element does to this station, the strain will not have been what killed the specimen, because the strain lost to the specimen 11 days running. The only thing that can kill the human now is us, the resolution, the burn, the tool that always works. If the human is aboard when the element arrives, the human dies for our contamination, having beaten our contamination. And the record of what happened here will be sealed, because the concordance seals the record of everything it resolves, and the truth of this station will go to the dead moon with the ash. She drew a breath. I am going to put the human on the last outbound craft before the element arrives with the full record unsealed, not the finding, the truth. What we did, and what it cost, and what we learned that we did not want to learn. I am going to send the fragile one's confession out of the fire in the one body the fire cannot touch. And then I am going to stay because I ran this program, and a physician does not send her specimen out to carry her guilt and then follow it into the lifeboat. Thessel looked at her for a long time. The amber light moved on the gray walls. They will call the human a plague ship, he said. The concordance. They will see a row body coming out of a resolved station carrying an unsealed record, and they will do to it exactly what we did, quarantine it, study it, look for its threshold. You will be sending it out of one white room into another. Perhaps, Otney said. But it will be alive to be studied, and it does not break, and the record will be in the volume where someone someday may read it. That is more than the ash. And she found the next sentence surprising even as she said it. I think the human has spent its whole life going into white rooms and coming out the far side. I think there is no white room in the volume built to hold it, because a white room is a tool, and its whole strength is that our tools do not work on it. I am not sending it to a cage. I am sending it home the long way. It will get there. I have stopped at last doubting that it will get there. Thessel closed his eyes. When he opened them, he reached into the desk with a hand that had begun to shake, the Varith version of the human's tremor, the body pulling itself inward against a fire it could not fight, and he keyed something into the console, and the last outbound craft, which the closure order had locked to the docking cradle along with everything else, came unlocked on the manifest. There, he said, you will not have to steal it, an old man's last honest thing, put the specimen on it. Send the confession. Do not stay, Otney. His voice roughened. That is not a request from your overseer. Your overseer is dead. He simply has not stopped talking yet. It is a request from a man who spent 40 years erasing and who would like before the fire to have spared one thing that could still fight. Go with it. Carry the record yourself. Let the guilt walk out on its own legs and answer for itself in the volume. That is harder than staying. Staying is easy. Staying is another flinch. You taught me that this week and you did not even know you were teaching it. Now learn it back. Otney did not answer him. She could not. She left the gray box for the last time, and behind her the overseer sat alone with the doctrine he had written and the fire he had approved, and did not call anyone to the glass, because he had decided, at the very end, to be the kind of thing that meets the fire in its own chair. She went to the tier. Cyril was there, and the human was there, and the human was standing. It was the first time Otney had seen it on its feet. It had come up off the platform on its own, wasted and gray and unsteady, one hand on the recline for the balance its spent muscles could not yet find, and it stood in the white room at its full height, which was not great, smaller than Cyril, far smaller than Thessel, an ordinary battered body in a room built to break bodies. And it was, Otney understood, the largest thing she had ever stood next to. Not in size, in the other measure, the one the Institute had no instrument for. He unlocked a craft, the human said. It had heard somehow, or it had simply known the way it had known everything else before she did. You're getting me out before your people come to burn the house. Yes. And you're coming. Yes. The human nodded slowly. It looked at Cyril. Both of you, it said. It was not a question either, and when Cyril's throat did the thing that in a Varith was the start of a refusal, the human said quietly, Kid, you crossed the line days ago. You started fastening the straps loose. You started talking to me like a person. You're the only one of them who figured out on his own that the specimen could hear. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing, actually. That's the only part of your people worth carrying out of the fire. So you're coming and you're going to help her carry the record, and you're going to spend the rest of your life being the Varath who learned to say the sentence and meant it. We are the fragile ones. Say it now. Start practicing. We are the fragile ones, Cyril said. His voice cracked in the middle of it, and he said it again, steadier. We are the fragile ones. There you go, the human said. It swayed, caught itself on the recline, and Otni moved to steady it before she had decided to, her clean hand on the burning arm of the thing her institute had spent 3 weeks trying to break, and the human let her, and looked at her with the flat attention that had never once, in all of it, curdled into hatred. You should know my name, it said. You've had me on a table for 19 days and you never once used it, because a name makes a specimen into a person, and a person you can't drop stones on. It's Noah. Noah Vance. I ran life support on the tender Kestrel Ann out of a station you'll never have heard of, for a crew of 11 who are probably ash by now because your people don't leave witnesses. Say it. Just once. I want to hear one of you say it before we go. Noah Vance, Otni said. There, the human said. Now I'm not a specimen, now I'm a person you helped. That's going to sit different in the record than the source. That's going to sit different in you. She straightened off the recline, testing her legs, finding them. All right, doctor, 9 days and a fire coming. Let's go carry your confession out of the clean place. I've been in a lot of clean places. They all burn eventually. It's the dirty things that last. The last outbound craft sat in the cold cradle at the station's outermost ring, a short-haul survey tender the Institute used for ferrying samples between the White Reach and the Concordance waypoints, no larger than the room they were leaving, and it took the 3 of them the better part of a shift to reach it, because a dying sterile station is not a place you cross quickly. Every deck they passed through wanted to seal behind them. The station's own systems, running the containment protocol the clinicians had written, kept trying to trap the contamination it could feel moving through it, and the contamination it could feel moving through it was them. Was Otni and Cyril, who had breathed the White Reach's air for days, and might carry the fire in their clean bodies without yet knowing it. Twice the amber doors tried to lock them into a corridor, and Cyril had to override the seal with a diagnostician's authority. He was not, strictly, senior enough to hold, and each time the station argued with him in the flat synthetic voice of a machine built by people who had never imagined that the thing it was protecting might need to leave. Noah walked between them, slow and gray and steady, one hand trailing the wall for balance, and she watched the doors fight the 2 Varath with an expression Otni was learning to read. Your whole station's built to keep things from getting out, Noah said at the 3rd door. Not in, out, every reflex it's got is about containment. You never built a single system for evacuation, did you? Because evacuation means admitting a thing might beat you and you'd need to run. And you people don't run, you erase. She watched Cyril wrestle the seal. That's the tell. That's how I knew, back on the platform, that you'd never met anything like me. A species that expects to lose sometimes builds doors that open. You only build doors that shut. There was never a need, Cyril said, working the override. There's always a need, Noah said. You just never noticed you were paying for the times there wasn't. The craft's hatch opened to the manifest override Thessal had keyed, and they went aboard, and the small, clean interior smelled of nothing, the way everything in the White Reach smelled of nothing, and Noah breathed it in and made the complicated face again. Clean, she said. One more clean box, all right. She lowered herself into the recline the survey crews used, and her wasted arms shook with the small effort of it, and she let them shake without comment, the way she had let everything cost what it cost for 19 days. Fly your confession out of here, doctor. I'll tell you when to be afraid. I'm good at knowing when to be afraid. It's the only thing my world ever taught me that you people would recognize as a skill." Otni took the tender out of the cradle with hands that had not flown anything in 30 years, and the white reach fell away behind them, a pale ring around a dead moon, the cleanest place in the known volume, going quiet deck by deck as its people died of their own best idea. They were 4 hours out when the response element arrived, and Otni turned the tender so that Noah could see it, because Noah had asked to see it, and because Otni had decided that a person who had watched the Varith die for a week had earned the right to watch the rest. It came in bright. That was the thing Otni had not been prepared for, though she had approved the resolution mandate herself in her own career twice, for worlds she had never seen do this. The concordance did not burn a station with fire. Fire was dirty. Fire left ash and char and the possibility of something surviving in a cold pocket. The concordance sterilized with light, a flood of hard, clean radiance that left nothing to survive in, the ultimate expression of the doctrine. The outside applied so totally that there was no longer any inside for anything to hide in. The white reach lit up against the dead moon like a second sun, silent and white and complete, and held that brightness for a long moment. And when the brightness faded, the pale ring was still there, intact, unmarked and utterly empty, a clean thing made cleaner, the way the Varith had always made things clean, by making sure there was nothing left in them that could ever fight. Somewhere in that light was Overseer Thessal, in his gray chair, meeting the tool he had written. Somewhere in it were 14 exposed, and the clinicians who had run the failing sweeps, and the whole competent service that had drilled a protocol for 100 years, without once meeting a contagion that fought. Somewhere in it was the doctrine, applied at last to the people who had authored it, working perfectly, as Thessal had promised it would, because burning the house always works, and that was the whole of what was wrong with it, and the whole of what the Varith had never let themselves see. "That's how you people fix things," Noah said quietly, watching the light fade. "Not medicine, erasure. You don't have an inside that fights, so you made a civilization that just deletes anything the outside can't clean." She was silent a moment. "You know the worst part, it's elegant. It really does work. You could run the whole galaxy that way for 1,000,000 years and never lose, as long as you never met one thing you couldn't delete." She turned her gray face from the fading light to Otni. "And now you have. It's sitting in your record, and you can't delete it because it's already out of the box in a body you couldn't burn, flying away from the fire. That's the thing your people are going to have to learn to live with, Doctor. For the first time in your history, there's a true thing loose in the volume that you can't make clean. Welcome to how the rest of us have always lived." Otni flew the tender toward the nearest concordance waypoint and did not answer, because there was no answer, and because she had begun, in the last hour, to feel warm. She said nothing about it at first. A physician did not announce a symptom, a physician confirmed it. But she watched herself with the cold attention she had spent 19 days spending on Noah, and by the end of the first transit day she was certain, and by the certainty she understood that she had breathed the white reach's air too long after all, and that the fire she had flown out of the burning station had flown out with her, in her own clean furnace-less body, and that she was going to die the way Vosk had died, from the inside, with tools that did not work, on a small craft 4 days from anywhere. Noah knew before Otni said it. Of course she did. "You've gone quiet," Noah said, on the morning of the second day, in an echo of the platform that Otni did not think was accidental. "You stopped looking at me like the interesting problem. You started looking at your own hands." She studied Otni across the small, clean cabin. "You've got it. You and probably the kid, too. You breathed it days ago before you knew what it was. And now you're flying my record home and dying of your own experiment at the same time, and you haven't told the kid because you don't want him to spend his last 4 days afraid." Her voice was flat and even and without cruelty, the voice of a woman who had kept 11 people alive on a machine for 4 years and had learned exactly how to say the hard thing. "Sit down, Doctor. Let me tell you how this goes." because I'm the only one on this ship who's ever watched it up close and lived. And you're about to need to know the thing your whole civilization spent 1,000,000 years making sure it never had to learn. Otni sat. Her hands had begun, faintly, to shake, the body pulling itself inward against a fire it had no way to fight, the Varith flinch, the most elaborate flinch in the history of the volume, running now in her own blood. "I can't burn it out for you," Noah said. "You know that. You don't have the furnace and I can't give you mine. So you're going to die, probably, unless your people at the waypoint have gotten better at their tools than the ones at the station, which they haven't, because it's the same tools." She leaned forward, gray and wasted and utterly steady. "But here's what I can give you. And it's the only thing worth giving, and it's the thing your overseer went looking for at the very end and couldn't find in time. You want to know why I wasn't glad watching your people die? You want to know why I'm not glad now watching you start to? It's not mercy. I don't have a lot of mercy left. Your people spent most of it. It's this." She held Otni's shaking clean hand in her own burning one and did not let go. "On my world, everything is dying all the time. Everything's got the fire in it every second from the day it's born. And we don't get to be afraid of it, because if you spend your whole life afraid of the fire, you never get anything else done. So we learned a different thing. We learned to be busy instead of afraid. You keep the air breathable, you keep the water clean, you keep the heat where it's supposed to be for the crew of 11 for 4 years while the fire's in all of you the whole time. That's the whole secret, Doctor. That's the strength your people came looking for and couldn't find because you kept looking in the blood and it was never in the blood. It's in what you do with the time while you're burning." She tightened her grip. "You've got maybe 4 days. You're carrying a record that could change how the whole volume thinks about worlds like mine. So don't spend the 4 days afraid. Spend them busy. Fly the ship. Carry the record. Teach the kid the sentence. Die on the way to doing something instead of dying in a chair like your overseer. That's not mercy I'm giving you. That's the only medicine my world ever made. It doesn't cure anything. It just tells you what to do with the fire while it's in you. And it's the strongest thing I own, and I'm giving it to you because you said my name." Cyril had the fire in him too. Otni had known it since the second day, from the color of his throat, and she had done what Noah had accused her of doing, kept it from him to spare him the fear. And on the third day Cyril came to her at the tender's controls and told her he knew, and that he had known as long as she had, and that he had kept it from her for the same reason. They looked at each other, the two dying physicians, and something passed between them that was almost the human expression Otni still had no word for. And then they went back to work, because Noah had told them to be busy instead of afraid, and it turned out that being busy was a thing you could choose, even furnaceless, even clean, even at the end. They spent the third day preparing the record. It was the hardest work Otni had ever done, and it had nothing to do with her hands. The Institute's records were built to hold findings, and a finding had a shape, the specimen, the agent, the threshold, the interpretation. What she had to enter was not a finding. It was a confession, and the record had no field for it, so she built the fields herself, in plain language, because the human had taught her that the plain grammar was the only honest one. She wrote what they had done to Noah Vance of the tender Kestrel Anne. She wrote the loads and the escalations, and the fever they had mistaken for failure. She wrote Vosk at the glass. She wrote the reclamation river and the 14, and the response element, and the bright clean light that had made the white reach cleaner by making it empty. And when she reached the interpretation field, the one she had left blank on the first day because a body that would not break had given her nothing to write, she found that she finally had something to write, and that it was the opposite of everything the Institute had ever taught her to look for. She wrote, "The specimen has no threshold. We searched for the human weakness and found only the shape of our own. The doctrine is false. Not incomplete false. There exist bodies that survival has made unmappable because their strength is not a mechanism to be located and turned, but a way of being alive that our instruments cannot touch and our tools cannot copy and our fire cannot instruct. We are not the top of the ladder. We are the most fragile thing in the volume, and we have survived only by never before meeting a thing we could not erase. We have now met it. It is called a human. It does not break. It cannot be owned. It can only be left alone, and the whole of our future safety depends on our learning, at last, to do the one thing our doctrine has never permitted, to leave a thing alive that we do not control. She read it once. She did not need to read it 3 times. She sealed it open, an instruction that did not exist in the Institute's grammar, a record that could not be closed, that would transmit itself to every concordance node it passed within range of and refuse every command to stop. And she felt, doing it, the specific vertigo of a loyal creature committing the most disloyal act of its life for the first and last time. "You've never done anything like that," Noah observed, watching her. "I can tell. You've got the look my crew got the first time they had to break a reg to keep the ship alive, terrified and about 20 years younger all at once." "It will not close," Otni said. "I have made a record that will not close. The concordance has never held a record that would not close." "Yeah," Noah said, "that's the point. That's the whole point. You can't burn what won't hold still and you can't clean what won't stop talking. You just made the first dirty thing your people have ever owned. Congratulations. It's the only thing you've got that's going to outlive the fire in your blood." She looked at the sealed open record with something that, on a human face, Otni was beginning to understand was respect. "That's better than surviving, Doctor. Anybody can survive. You made a true thing that won't shut up. My whole species would be proud of you, and we don't get proud of clean people. Ever." They reached the waypoint on the 4th day. It was called Conquered Threshold, a quarantine station strung across the border lane where the concordance's inner volume met the outer dark, and it was, Otni saw as they came in, a larger and harder cousin of the White Reach, the same white doctrine expressed in heavier metal, built not to study contamination but to stop it, the place the response elements returned to and the place the resolution mandates were signed. A Varith station in its mind and a Drael station in its hands. The Drael ran the quarantine's enforcement, tall, hard-shelled enforcers bred by the concordance for the work the Varith could not stomach doing themselves, the muscle behind the doctrine's clean logic, and it was a Drael voice that came over the tender's channel as they approached, flat and hard as a closing door, ordering them to hold at the outer ring for resolution assessment. Otni held. She had no choice. The waypoint's field had the small tender the moment it came in range. And then the Varith mind of the place spoke, over the Drael hand of it, and Otni recognized the voice before it gave its name, because she had heard that particular register her whole career. The register of the doctrine speaking from a great height, certain and clean and entirely without doubt. "This is Curator General Vesson," the voice said. "You are the sourcecraft from the White Reach. You are carrying uncatalogued contamination and a row-class specimen out of a resolved station, in violation of the closure. You will understand that this cannot be permitted to proceed. I have reviewed the White Reach's final transmissions. I have reviewed the exposure record. I know precisely what you are carrying, prime diagnostician, and I will tell you plainly, physician to physician, that I am sorry. You did difficult work in impossible conditions, and you deserved better than this outcome. But the doctrine does not bend for the people who serve it. You know this. You have applied it yourself. The source cannot be allowed to spread the contamination. Your craft will be held, assessed, and resolved." "Curator General," Otni said, "before you resolve us, you should know 3 things, and you should know them in order because the order matters. First, the 2 Varith aboard this craft are already exposed. We are dying of the White Reach's contamination as we speak. Resolving us changes nothing for us. You would be sterilizing 2 corpses on a schedule. Second, the specimen aboard this craft is not the source of anything. The specimen is the only body in this volume the contamination has already lost to, comprehensively, 11 times over. You are not looking at a plague ship, Curator General. You are looking at the one place the plague could not go. And third, she drew the breath that a lifetime of doctrine had not prepared her to spend. The record of the White Reaches aboard this craft, sealed open, transmitting itself to every node it passes, and it will not close. It is already in your station's memory. It has been since we came in range. Whatever you resolve out here in the dark, Curator General, the true account of what we did and what it cost and what it means is already inside your walls, and it will not hold still, and it will not stop talking, and there is no light bright enough to make it clean. There was a silence on the channel. Otni let it run. She had learned from 19 days of a human who spent no words she did not need, the weight a silence could carry when you did not rush to fill it. You have transmitted a sealed open record into a quarantine node, Vesson said at last, and for the first time the great clean height of the voice had a crack in it, a thing Otni knew intimately because she had spent the last 3 weeks listening to it open in her own. You understand what you have done, a record that will not close, inside a station that resolves by erasure. You have put a thing in my walls that my whole doctrine cannot touch. Yes, Otni said. I have handed you a fact that shouldn't exist. I learned how from the specimen. It is the human's only real weapon, Curator General, and it turns out to be the only one that matters. Not the fever, not the furnace, the refusal to be made clean. The human spent 19 days on my platform being unmappable, and I have spent 4 days learning to be a record you cannot close. Resolve the craft. Burn the 2 dying physicians and the enduring specimen and this small, clean tender. It will not help you. The dirty thing is already loose in your house, and the only question left to you, the only one, is whether you are going to spend the rest of the Concordance's history erasing your way toward the fire, or whether you are going to do the thing my overseer could not do in time, and read the record and learn the sentence and say it and mean it. We are the fragile ones, Curator General. We always were. The human has just made it impossible for us to keep pretending otherwise. They did not resolve the craft. Otni had not expected that. She had spoken her 3 things into the channel the way a physician reads a terminal chart, without hope of changing the outcome, only for the honesty of it, and she had been prepared for the clean white light to come. Instead, the tender was drawn in, held in the waypoint's field, and pulled through the outer ring into a quarantine bay, a sealed white cavern deep in the station's body, where a resolution could be performed in a controlled volume rather than out in the open dark. It was, Otni understood, a compromise of exactly the kind the doctrine produced in a crisis. Vesson would not let the craft proceed, but Vesson also would not resolve it at range, because Vesson had a record he could not close sitting in his walls, and a Curator General who resolves the source of a record he cannot close has to explain afterward, to a concordance that can now read the record, why he burned the witness. The doctrine had, for the first time in Otni's experience, been made to hesitate. The human had done that. The human had put a true thing loose in the house, and a house with a true thing loose in it moves differently than a house that can still erase. The bay sealed around them. The Drail enforcers took position outside the tender's hatch, hard-shelled and silent, and did not board, because boarding a contaminated craft was not a thing a Drail did lightly even in armor. The doctrine that ran them was the same doctrine that had left the Varith with no furnace, a doctrine that had never learned to walk toward a fire. And then, through the bay's channel, Curator General Vesson said that he was coming down to see the specimen with his own eyes, and Otni heard, in the flat, clean voice, the thing she had been listening for, the crack widening, the certainty beginning at the top of the whole structure to fail. He's coming to look at me himself, Noah said. She had listened to all of it from the recline, gray and wasted and steady. That's new, right? Your top man doesn't usually come down and look at the specimen. He sends the instrument so he doesn't have to feel anything about it. Your overseer told me that himself, near the end, that the whole station was built so nobody senior ever had to stand next to the thing they were studying. She shifted, testing her strength, finding a little more of it than the day before, the body climbing back up out of the hole it had dug. He's coming down because the record scared him. A number on a chart he can resolve. A person he has to look at he can't. That's why your people never look. Looking is the crack. He's about to make the same mistake the kid made weeks ago on the platform. He's about to find out the specimen can hear. Vesson came to the bay behind the thickest glass the waypoint owned, with 2 Drail at his shoulders and the whole weight of the doctrine at his back. And he was, Otney saw, old the way Thessal had been old, gray in the membrane with a lifetime of clean rooms, a physician's mind grown into an administrator's certainty. He looked at Otney first, and there was something almost gentle in it, the recognition of one servant of the doctrine for another. Then he looked past her, through the tender's open hatch, into the small, clean cabin where the human sat, and Otney watched the curator general of Conquered Threshold look at a human being with his own eyes for the first time in his life, and she watched the doctrine meet the thing it had no field for. "That is the source," Vesson said. He said it the way a man says a word to remind himself it is still true. That small, damaged thing, that is what resolved the White Reach. "No," Noah said before Otney could answer. Her voice carried through the hatch, low and even, and Otney saw the 2 Drail shift at the sound of it, because a specimen was not supposed to speak to a curator general, and this one had, unbidden, and had corrected him. "I didn't resolve anything. Your people resolved the White Reach. You resolved it from all the way out here with a mandate you'll sign again next week for the next station that scares you. All I did was have a fever on a table your people strapped me to. Everything after that you did to yourselves." She held his gaze through the glass and the hatch and did not blink and did not soften. "You came down here to look at the monster. I get it. You want to see the thing that broke your best station so you can understand it, because if you understand it you can beat it, because that's the only move your whole civilization has. Understand the lock, cut the lock. So look all you want. I'll wait. I'm good at waiting. I've been strapped to a table for 3 weeks, and I'm going to outlast every clean thing on this station, so take your time." "You are a body," Vesson said. "A body has a mechanism. Every mechanism can be understood, and every understood mechanism can be turned. That is not doctrine, specimen. That is simply true. The prime diagnostician's record is eloquent, and it is frightened, and it makes a claim I am not prepared to accept, that there exists a strength which is not a mechanism. I have spent 40 years finding the mechanism in everything. I will find yours." "Sure," Noah said. "That's what the last one said too. And the one before him bought me from whoever took my ship. It's a very consistent song, your people. Here's the part you keep not hearing." She leaned forward, and the effort cost her, and she paid it without flinching, and Otney understood that the human was choosing to spend the strength on this, on saying the thing exactly, because the cost of saying it loose was measured in stations. "You're right that I'm a body. You're right that it's a mechanism. You could take me apart for the next 100 years and map every piece of it. And at the end you'd have a perfect map of a human body, and you still wouldn't have the thing you're looking for, because the thing you're looking for isn't in the parts. It's in the fact that the parts don't quit. You can map a fire, curator. You can chart every flame. It doesn't put the fire out, and it doesn't tell you how to be the thing that's on fire and keeps working anyway. That's not a mechanism. That's a decision my whole species made 1 billion years before there were any of you to study it, and it's not written in any one place you can cut out. It's written in all of it at once all the time. You want to own it. You can't own it. You can only meet it, and you've met it now. And it's already loose in your walls in a record you can't close, and it's sitting in this cabin looking at you, and it is not afraid of you. And that right there, that I'm not afraid of the man who can burn me, that's the whole thing you came down to understand, and you're never going to understand it, because understanding it would mean admitting you've been afraid your entire life, of everything, and you built a galaxy to keep from having to feel it." The bay was silent. The Drail did not move. Vesson stood at the glass, and Otney watched his throat, and saw it go at last, the deep pale of true fear, not the fear of the contamination, which he had lived beside his whole career, But the other fear, the one the human had just named, the one the doctrine had been built to make sure no Varith ever had to feel. Curator General, Otni said quietly into the silence. The record has already passed to 4 nodes on the border lane. I set it to seal open. It transmits to everything in range and it accepts no command to stop. By the time you decide what to do with this craft, the Concordance's inner volume will have begun to read it. You cannot resolve your way back to before it existed. There is no light bright enough. The only question left to you is the one I put to you from the tender, and it has not changed. Whether you spend the rest of your life erasing toward the fire, or whether you do the thing none of us managed in time, you read it, and you learn the sentence, and you leave the human alive, and you let the volume learn what we learned, so that no one ever brings another human to another white room to look for a weakness that is not there. She felt the fever move in her own blood as she spoke, the fire she had flown out of the white reach, and she found that Noah was right, that being busy with the true thing was better than being afraid of the fire. And she kept talking, because the talking was the work and the work was the medicine, and there was no other kind left. You are not going to find the human's threshold, Curator General. There isn't one. But there is still time to find yours, the point at which even your people can choose finally to stop. Find that. It is the only floor on this station worth locating. And it is not down. It is not a stone you drop. It is a thing you decide. The human has been trying to teach it to us for 19 days, and it took me 3 weeks and my own death to hear it. You have the record. You do not have to be as slow as I was. Vesin did not answer for a long time, and while he did not answer, the doctrine's other half arrived to answer for him. The Drael came into the observation gallery behind the glass with the heavy, unhurried certainty of a thing bred for one purpose, and the largest of them, a hard-shelled enforcer whose plating carried the muted marks of rank, put itself between Vesin and the glass, and spoke in the flat, grinding register of a species that had never in its history been asked to feel anything about its work. Provost Kaldruin, the plating said, in the small etched glyphs the Drael wore in place of a spoken name. The provost did not look at the human. The provost looked at Vesin. Curator General, the assessment is complete and the assessment is not yours to defer. This craft carries active contamination and a confirmed source. The mandate is clear and the mandate is standing. It requires no deliberation and it permits none. I will resolve the bay on your authority, or, if you continue to withhold your authority, on my own, under the contingency provision that exists precisely for a curator who has looked too long at a specimen and lost the discipline to sign. I have read your throat, Curator General. You have been down here too long. Step back from the glass. Let me do the work you no longer have the stomach for. The record, Vesin began. The record is a document, the provost ground out. A document is a thing that has been written. A thing that has been written can be unwritten. You are frightened of a file, Curator General, and you have let the fright talk you out of a mandate that has never once failed the Concordance in the whole of its history. This is what comes of letting a physician run a border. A physician looks for the mechanism. An enforcer knows there is no mechanism worth finding once a thing has become a source. You resolve the source. You do not converse with it. You do not come down to the glass and let it teach you to be afraid. The provost turned at last and looked into the tender's cabin, at the small gray human in the recline, and there was nothing in the look at all, not hatred, not curiosity, only the flat assessment of a tool measuring a task. It is a body. It burns like anything burns. I have resolved 40 sources in this bay, and not one of them was special, and this one will not be special either, whatever it has convinced 2 dying physicians and a rattled curator to believe about it. Step back. And Noah Vance, strapped to nothing now, wasted to the frame, 19 days into a fever that had beaten the finest weapon the Concordance had ever built, looked at the thing that had come to burn her and said, in the same flat, even voice she had used for all of it, "Go ahead." The provost paused. "That's the part you didn't plan for," Noah said. You came in here to resolve a source, and the source just told you to go ahead, and now you don't know what to do because every other thing you've ever burned begged first, or fought first, or at least got afraid first, and that's what makes it easy. The fear is the part you're actually killing. The fear is what tells you it worked. I'm not going to give you that. I've had the fire in me for 19 days. I've been going to die the whole time, and I've been busy instead because that's the only thing my world taught me that's worth a damn. So light the bay, do your 41st, but understand what you're going to see when you do it because it's the thing you came here to avoid seeing. She held the enforcer's blank hard gaze and her own did not waver. You're going to see a body that isn't afraid of you, right up to the end. And your whole species is built on the idea that everything is afraid of you at the end, because that's what makes you the hand of the doctrine, that's the whole of what you're for. And you're going to burn me, and I'm not going to give you the fear, and you're going to carry that. The one that wouldn't be afraid. You'll carry it into the 42nd and the 43rd, and it'll be there every time, the small gray thing that told you to go ahead. That's what I've got, Provost. That's the only thing my kind ever really had. We're the ones that aren't afraid of you at the end. Now do it or don't. The Provost did not do it. Otni watched the hard-shelled enforcer stand at the glass with its authority intact, and its mandate standing, and every provision on its side, and watched it not do the thing it had come to do, and she understood that she was watching the doctrine break in the one place it had never broken, not in the mind, where Thessal and Vessin had at least the equipment for doubt, but in the hand, in the bred and certain instrument that was supposed to have no doubt at all. The human had reached the thing that could not be reasoned with, and had not reasoned with it. The human had simply refused it the one thing it needed, refused it the fear, and a hand that has been built to harvest fear does not know what to do with a thing that will not yield any. Curator General, the Provost said, and its grinding voice had changed minutely in a way Otni would not have caught a month ago and could not now unhear. Give the order. I find I would prefer the order to come from you. And Vessin at the glass, with the record already spreading through 4 nodes and beginning its slow ignition across the inner volume, with the human's flat unafraid gaze on him and the prime diagnostician's fever-bright honesty beside it, and the whole clean structure of his life tilting under him, made the second oldest choice a physician can make, the one the doctrine had trained out of his people 1 billion years before there was a doctrine to train them. He chose to leave a thing alive that he did not control. Stand down the bay, Vessin said. His voice was not steady. Otni had never heard a Curator General's voice fail to be steady, and she found that the sound of it was not weakness but the exact opposite, the sound of a clean thing choosing, for the first time, to be honest instead. Provost, stand down the bay. The source will not be resolved. The record will not be closed. Log my authority and log my name against both decisions, so that when the inner volume reads what I have done there is no confusion about who did it. Curator General Vessin, at conquered threshold, declined the mandate. Let it be written exactly that way. I want the whole concordance to know that the doctrine met a human being at this station, and that a Curator General chose, with the mandate standing and the provision on his side, not to burn it. Let them convene whatever they convene. Let them replace me. I will hand my successor a record that will not close and a border that has, for the first time in its history, let something dangerous live, and I will tell my successor what the prime diagnostician told me, and what the specimen told the provost, and what I have finally understood standing at this glass. He turned from the human to Otni, and his gray failing throat was, she saw, the most honest thing on the station. We are the fragile ones. We built the cleanest civilization in the volume because we could not survive a dirty one, and we called our fragility power, and we went out looking for the weakness of the one species strong enough to survive anything, and we found our own instead, and the only mercy in any of it is that the human was patient enough to explain it to us before we finished the job. I am not going to finish the job. That is the whole of my authority, and I am spending all of it at once. Stand down the bay. The provost stood down the bay. Otni felt the fever crest in her then. the fire cresting the way Noah's had crested on the platform, except that Otni had no furnace to meet it with, and she sat down slowly at the tender's controls because her legs had stopped being reliable, and Cyril came and stood beside her the way he had stood beside her on the first day when the number would not climb, and the two of them, the two dying physicians who had run the program, watched through the hatch as the human they had strapped to a table sat in the recline of a small clean craft in a bay that was not going to burn, and did not celebrate, and did not gloat, and only closed its eyes for a moment, resting, the way a thing rests that has finished one shift and knows there will be another. You held on, Otni said to it, through the hatch. It was not a physician's sentence. She had stopped speaking in physician's sentences somewhere over the last 4 days and did not miss them. I always hold on, Noah said without opening her eyes. I told you, it's not brave, it's just the machine I am. You people kept waiting for me to be brave so you could measure the bravery and find the edge of it. There's no edge, it's not bravery, it's just Tuesday. She opened her eyes and looked at the two of them, the dying pair at the controls, and something moved in her face that was not quite the not smile, something older and more tired and more kind. You're both going to die, she said. You know that. You breathed it days ago and you don't have the furnace and there's no jar. I'm sorry. I mean that. Not because your people don't deserve some of this, because they do, but because you two, at the end, you did the thing. You said the sentence. You got the record out. You're not the doctrine. You're the two who broke it from the inside, and there's no clean word in your language for what that makes you, so I'll give you the dirty one from mine. She looked at them steadily. You're brave, not the machine kind, the real kind, the kind you only get to be if you were afraid the whole time and did it anyway. My people invented that word for exactly this, and you two just earned it 4 days before the end in a clean box a long way from anywhere. Spend what's left being busy. It's the only medicine there is. It won't save you. It'll just tell you what to do with the fire. The record reached the inner volume on the 6th day, and the concordance did what a clean and careful power does when a true thing gets loose in its house. It tried at every level to close a document that had been built not to close, and failed at every level, and in the failing began, slowly and against its whole nature, to read. Otni watched it happen from the quarantine bay. From the recline of the small tender, she no longer had the strength to fly. On the med panel, Cyril propped where she could see it because she had asked to see it, and because a dying woman who had spent her death making a record was entitled to watch the record work. The border nodes lit first, flagging the sealed open file as a containment anomaly, a document that transmitted itself and refused every order to stop, and the flags climbed the lanes toward the center the way the fever had climbed Noah's body, brief and obedient at the start, and then unstoppable. By the 8th day the file was in the Concordance's high archive, in the clean chambers where the doctrine was written, and there were physicians in those chambers reading a prime diagnostician's confession that the doctrine was false, not incomplete, false, and there was no field in any of their systems to file such a thing, so it sat in their archive raw and open and talking, exactly as Otni had built it, the first dirty thing the Concordance had ever been unable to make clean. They convened an inquiry. Of course they did. It was the cleanest available response, the institutional version of drawing the sample a second time, and Vesson was summoned to answer for the mandate he had declined, and Otni's name was entered as the author of the anomaly, and for a few days the whole apparatus of the Concordance bent itself to the familiar work of finding the mundane mistake that wore the impossible's clothes. The frightened physician, the compromised curator, the specimen that had somehow deceived them all. Otni watched them try to build that story out of the mid-panel and could not summon the strength to be angry, because she had tried to build the same story herself, on the platform on the first day, when the number would not climb. She knew the shape of it from the inside. She knew exactly how long a clean mind could keep a true thing at arm's length. She had held it off for 3 weeks. The Concordance would hold it off longer, because the Concordance was larger and had more room to look away. But the record would not close, and a record that will not close is a patient teacher. The inquiry could not proceed without reading it, and reading it was the crack, and Otni had learned from the human that the crack was the whole thing. One at a time, in the high clean chambers, physicians who had spent their careers finding the mechanism in everything read an account of a body that had no mechanism to find, and looked at the exposure record of the white reach, and looked at the resolution that had made the cleanest station in the volume cleaner by making it empty, and felt, at the back of the mind, in the unlit room where a clean creature keeps the things it will not say, the specific cold of a species realizing that the dirt has ideas. Humanity was reclassified on the 11th day. Otni was very weak by then. The fire had taken most of her. She moved between long, dim intervals of it, and in the clear stretches Cyril read her the changes off the med panel because his hands still worked and hers had mostly stopped. The old designation had been row-class biosphere, hazard graded, forbidden to walk without isolation, flagged for study, a world to be mapped, a lock awaiting a key. The new designation had no precedent, and the High Archive had been forced to build a field for it, the way Otni had been forced to build a field for her confession, because the doctrine had no grammar for what the human had made them understand. The new designation said, in the clean, flat language of the record that could not be closed, contact prohibited, study prohibited, resolution prohibited. Not because the world was too dangerous to approach. The concordance had approached dangerous worlds for its whole history, but because approach itself had been demonstrated to produce only harm to the approaching party, reliably, generation on generation, by a mechanism that could not be located and therefore could not be defended against. The humans were not a species to be mapped. They were a species to be left alone, and the leaving alone was not mercy and it was not fear, or it was both, in the way that the deepest true things are always both. It was simply the only survivable posture. You did not walk toward the fire. You had never been built to walk toward the fire. You had spent 1 billion years making sure you would never have to, and the one time you forgot, it had cost you the white reach, and the record of that cost would not close. And so the concordance did the thing it had never done for any world in the whole of its clean and careful history. It wrote humanity down as the thing you leave alone, and it meant it, because the alternative was in its walls, talking and would not stop. They did it, Cyril said. He read it to her twice because she asked him to, and the second time his voice broke in the middle, and Otni understood that her junior analyst was crying, in the way the Varith cried, silent, the throat gone pale, the whole body pulled inward around a thing too large to hold. They wrote her down as untouchable, prime diagnostician. We did that, the three of us in a clean box a long way from anywhere. We changed how the whole volume thinks about her world, and we're going to die of it and she's going to go home and he stopped. She told me I'd spend the rest of my life being the Varith who learned the sentence, on the platform, weeks ago, and I've got maybe a day. She was wrong. It's the only thing she was wrong about the whole time. Noah had heard. She heard everything. It was one of the things about her that had unnerved the Institute from the start, the way a thing that had kept 11 people alive on a machine for 4 years heard everything, all the time, because on her world the thing you failed to hear was the thing that killed you. She was stronger now, the body climbing back up, day on day, the fever banked to a warmth, the gray beginning to leave her skin, and she got herself up out of the recline and crossed the small cabin on legs that had decided, against all the Institute's expectations, to work, and she lowered herself down beside Cyril, next to the dying young Varith, and she did a thing Otni had never seen a human do, though she would learn later in the record's long afterlife, that it was among the most human things there was. She stayed. She did not offer a jar. There was no jar. She had told them that on the first honest day. She did not offer a cure or a comfort or a clean word. She simply sat down next to the frightened dying thing that had learned weeks ago to talk to a specimen like a person, and she stayed with it, and after a while she said quietly, "I wasn't wrong. I said you'd spend the rest of your life being the one who learned the sentence. I didn't say how long the rest of your life was. You don't get to pick that. Nobody does. On my world you especially don't. But the rest of your life started the day you loosened those straps, kid, and you've been spending it exactly the way I said ever since, and you're spending it right now, sitting here reading a dying woman her own victory in a voice that keeps breaking. That's the whole of it. That's what I meant. It was never about how many years. It was about what you do with the fire while it's in you. And you've been doing it right since before you knew you were on fire. She put her human hand on the young Vareth's shell-pale one, the way she had put it on Otni's 4 days before, the burning thing steadying the clean thing that could not burn. You learned the sentence. You said it and you meant it, and you got it out into the volume where it's going to protect my world for a long time after all 3 of us are gone. That's not a short life, Cyril. That's the only kind of long one there is. Cyril died in the night in the clean bay, with the human sitting beside him and the prime diagnostician failing quietly a few feet away. And he died the way the Vareth died, without a furnace, without a fight the body knew how to have. The fire simply taking what it wanted from the inside, while the tools that might have saved a different kind of creature sat useless in their racks. But he did not die afraid. Otni was awake for the end of it in one of her clear stretches, and she saw that her junior analyst, the one who had loosened the straps, the one who had learned first that the specimen could hear, the one who had said the sentence and meant it before any of them, went out with his throat gone pale but his hand steady in Noah's, doing the last of his short, long life the way she had told him to do it, busy to the end, reading nothing now, only present, only there. The human held his hand through all of it and did not look away, and when it was over she closed his eyes with 2 fingers, a human gesture the Vareth did not have, and she said something to him too low for Otni to hear, and then she sat with the body a while before she let the Bay's systems take it, because on her world, she said, you did not hand a thing you had sat with to the machines the moment it stopped. You waited. It cost nothing to wait, and it was the whole of what separated a crew from a cargo. Vesson came down to the glass the next day, alone, without the Drail. He was a changed thing. The inquiry had summoned him, and he had not gone. He had sent instead the record and a single line of his own, and the line was his name against the 2 decisions he had made, exactly as he had asked to have it written. Vesson declined the mandate. Vesson would not close the record, and now he stood at the glass of a bay he had refused to burn and looked at the human who had cost him his doctrine, and in the same stroke his career, and there was in his gray, failing old face none of the height that had been there when the tender first came in. The height was gone. What had replaced it was harder to name, and Otni, watching from the recline with the last of her clear time, thought it might be the thing the human had that the Vareth had no word for, the thing that was not gladness and not grief, but the low, steady attention of a creature that has finally decided to look at what is in front of it. I have arranged your passage, Vesson said to the human. It is not a short route. The direct lanes are concordance lanes, and the concordance, whatever the High Archive has written, is not yet ready to be seen escorting a human home in comfort. The doctrine dies slower than the document, and there are those in the inner volume who would still prefer you resolved, quietly, before the reclassification sets. So it is the long way. Border lanes, neutral waypoints, a chain of small craft that do not fly under our colors. It will take you the better part of a year to reach a lane your own people travel. I am sorry it is not better. It is the best a curator general who has spent all his authority at once can still command. He paused. You will make it. The prime diagnostician told me you would, weeks before I believed her. I believe her now. I do not think there is a white room in the volume built to hold you, and I have stopped trying to build one. You will go the long way, and you will get there, and you will tell your people what was done to you, and what it cost the ones who did it, and your world will be the thing the galaxy leaves alone, for a long time, because of what you were on a table at the White Reach. That is not nothing. It is the largest thing I have ever helped to do, and I helped to do it by declining, for the first time in my life, to do the thing my whole civilization is for. Thank you, Noah said. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, and Otni understood that the human meant it, that the coldness had never been the absence of the thing beneath it, but only the discipline that kept the thing from being spent where it would do no good. You didn't have to come down. Your top man told me your people are built so nobody senior ever has to stand next to the thing they studied. You came down twice. That's the crack. That's the whole thing. You looked at me, and you couldn't unlook, and here we are. She studied the changed old face through the glass. You're going to lose everything for this. The career, the station, maybe more if the ones who want me resolved get their way about you too, and you did it anyway. You want the word my people have for that, the one your language doesn't. It's the same one I gave the kid. You were afraid the whole time, and you did it anyway. That's the only kind of brave there is. The other kind, the kind that isn't afraid, that's not brave, that's just a machine, that's just me. You people keep thinking the strength you found in me was the not being afraid. It wasn't. I was born not being afraid of dying because my whole world dies all the time. That's not strength, that's just where I'm from. The strength you actually found, the one you should be writing in your archive, is the one you just did. The clean thing that was afraid of everything, standing at the glass, choosing not to burn the fire it was afraid of. That's the thing worth studying, curator. And it was in you the whole time. It just took a human on a table to make you spend it. Vesin was quiet. Then he inclined his head, a gesture the Varith used rarely and never toward a specimen, and he turned to go. And at the hatch he stopped and looked back, not at the human, but at Otni, at the prime diagnostician failing in the recline of the tender she had flown out of the fire. You will not make the long route, Otni, he said gently. You know this. You have perhaps a day. I can move you to the ward. The tools do not work, but the ward is more comfortable than a survey recline, and you have earned comfort, whatever the doctrine says about a physician who breaks it. No, Otni said. Her voice was almost gone, but the word was clear. I will stay on the craft. I ran the program. I flew the record out. I would like to finish where I have been useful, not where I would only be tended. Send me the med panel and let me keep watching the record work, and let me stay near the human until it goes, and then let the Bay do to me what it did to Cyril, and enter my name in the inquiry as the author of the anomaly, and do not soften it. I do not want to be softened. I want to be the physician who was wrong for 3 weeks and right at the end and paid for both. That is an honest thing to have been. It is the only honest thing my career ever managed, and I would like the record to keep it exactly that shape. Vesin looked at her a long moment. It will be written exactly that way, he said, and left, and the glass held nothing behind it but the empty gallery and the long, clean light of a station that had, for the first time in its history, let something dangerous live. The human came and sat with Otni at the end, the way it had sat with Cyril, because it had turned out that this was the thing the human did, the thing that no instrument at the White Reach had ever thought to measure. It stayed. It had stayed on the platform through 19 days of a fever built to break it. It had stayed in the tender through 4 days of flying its captor's confession out of the fire. It had stayed beside a frightened young Varith through the last of his short life, and now it lowered itself down beside the prime diagnostician who had inducted it, who had increased the load to 8 times standard and watched it shake in the straps, who had grown the strain it forged, and tested that strain on her own people's tissue and gone cold at what she found. And it did not hold any of that against her, or if it did, it had decided the holding was not worth the spending. And it sat down beside her and stayed. You should hate me, Otni said. It was perhaps the last clear thing she would manage, and she wanted to spend it on the truth. I put the fire in you. Everything that happened because I would not accept the reading on the first day. If I had believed you when you told me there was nothing wrong with you, that this was what right looked like, Cyril would be alive. The 14 would be alive. The White Reach would be a station and not an empty ring around a dead moon. I chose the doctrine over the reading every day for 3 weeks, and the doctrine was false, and you paid for my slowness in fever, and I paid for it in this. You should hate me. I would understand it. I have earned it more completely than I have ever earned anything. I know, Noah said. She did not soften it. That was the thing about her that Otni had come, at the very end, to understand as a kind of respect, that the human did not lie to make a dying woman comfortable, because the human's whole strength was the refusal to be made clean, and a comfortable lie was just another kind of clean. You did all of that, every bit of it. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, because it isn't, and you'd know I was lying, and I don't lie to people I've bled next to. She was quiet a moment. But here's the thing you keep not being able to hold, and I want you to hold it before you go, because you earned the holding. Being wrong for 3 weeks isn't the thing you'll be remembered for. Everybody's wrong. Being wrong is the cheapest thing a person does. What you did that almost nobody does, what your overseer couldn't do, what the whole clean, careful civilization behind you couldn't do in 1 billion years, is you changed your mind. You looked at a reading that broke the only thing you'd ever believed, and you didn't burn the reading. You burned the belief instead. Do you know how rare that is? I've been alive 24 years on the meanest world in the book, and I've met exactly 3 people who could do it, and one of them is you, and you did it dying, 4 days from anywhere, and you got the truth out into the volume where it's going to keep my whole species safe. You want to know what you'll be remembered for, Doctor? Not the loads, not the fever, the blank field. You left the interpretation blank when the doctrine told you to fill it with a lie, and then when you finally had the true thing to write, you wrote it and you sealed it so it couldn't be closed. That's you. That's the shape you'll keep. Not the woman who was wrong. The woman who wouldn't seal a lie and wouldn't unseal the truth. I'd take that shape. I'd take it in a heartbeat. Most people never get one that clean. Otni closed her eyes. The fire moved in her and she let it, and she found that the human was right about that too, that being busy with the true thing was better than being afraid, and that there was, even now, a last small work to do, which was to hear this and hold it and let it be the shape she carried out. Tell me, she said, before you go. Tell me what you'll do when you get home. I would like to carry it. It will be a good thing to be busy with at the end. The human told her. It told her about the tender Kestrel Anne, and the crew of 11, most of them gone now, and the 2 or 3 who might have made it to a lifeboat before the Concordance took the ship apart, and how the first thing she would do, the very first thing, was find out which of them were alive. It told her about a world of dirt and weather and small hungers competing in every handful of soil, a row world, a death world by the Concordance's book, where nothing had ever been clean and nothing ever would be, and how she had never once, in 24 years, thought of it as anything but home. It told her, in the flat, even voice that had unnerved a whole institute, about rain, which the Varith did not have, water falling out of the sky onto everything without permission, dirty and cold and alive, and how she was going to stand in it the first chance she got, with her face up, and let the meanest world in the book fall on her, and be glad. And Otni listened to all of it and was busy with it, and did not be afraid, and somewhere in the middle of the rain, the last of her clear time ran out, and she went the way Cyril had gone, without a furnace, without a fight her body knew how to have, but not alone, and not afraid, with a human's hand steady in hers and a picture of falling water in a mind that had spent its whole life in rooms where nothing was ever permitted to fall. Noah Vance closed the prime diagnostician's eyes with 2 fingers, the human gesture, and sat with the body a while, because you did not hand a thing you had bled next to the machines the moment it stopped. Then she let the bay do its clean work, and she got up, wasted and gray and standing, and she went to the small craft Vesson had arranged, the first in the long chain that would take her home the slow way, under no one's colors, through the border dark, the better part of a year to a lane her own people flew. She went the long way, and she made it. Vesson had said she would, and the prime diagnostician had said it weeks before Vesson believed it, and they were right, because there was no white room in the volume built to hold her, and the long way is only long to the things that break. The record did not close. It never closed. Vesson lost the station and the career, and in time more than that, and he spent what was left of it exactly as the human had told him he would, being the clean thing that had once been afraid and had chosen, at the glass, not to burn the fire it feared, and he counted it the best of everything he had done. The inquiry ran for years and reached, in the end, the only finding a true thing loose in the house permits, that the doctrine was false, not incomplete false, and that a civilization built on the certainty that every body has a threshold had met a body that did not, and had survived the meeting only because the body was patient enough to explain it before the last of them finished the job. They had gone out to find the weakness of the strongest thing in the volume. They had put their finest weapon into its blood and told it, in the only language they knew, to break. And the small gray body on the table had taken the weapon and burned it and handed it back sharpened, not against itself, because nothing they owned could stay sharp against a thing like that, but against them, because a fire that hot leaves nothing soft, and they were the softest thing in the volume, and always had been, and had spent 1 billion years making sure they never had to know it. What they found in the end was not the human's weakness. There wasn't one to find. What they found was the shape of their own, drawn for them in 19 days of fever by a woman who kept air breathable and water clean and heat where it was supposed to be, for a crew of 11, for 4 years, while the fire was in her the whole time, and who had answered every escalation they could invent with the same flat, unhurried question, the one no specimen had ever asked them before and none would need to ask again. Because the record would not close, and the answer was already loose in the walls of every clean room they had. She had lifted her head off the table and looked at the number that would not climb and asked them what the reading was. And then she had simply gone on being alive, which turned out to be the only strength that had ever frightened them, because it was the one they had traded away.